We don't hear much about the troubles in Northern Ireland since the Good Friday Political Agreement of 1998, but the peace process continues. Adults and teens from Fourth Presbyterian and Old St. Patrick's churches in Chicago were witnesses to it when they traveled to Belfast in August of 2011. To find out more, we welcome Reverend Bill Shaw, Director of the 174 Trust, an organization building peace and promoting reconciliation in Northern Ireland. We also welcome Mark Schimmelfinning and Elizabeth Dickey from Fourth Presbyterian Church, who were part of the trip. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Troubles are?
The Troubles were a period of conflict that stretched from 1969 to 1994. There have been some ongoing periods of violence since then, but nothing on the scale that there was between 69 and 94.
And then to Elizabeth and Mark, what made you interested in Northern Ireland?
Well, for me, partly it was the history of the religious conflict and how that all got started. The loyalists and the Republicans, and how, if you look at your history books, the first Republicans were actually the Protestants instead of the Catholics. And just how the Troubles evolved and how the peace process evolved were things that I always was fascinated in. And I've been able to, I've been fortunate enough to be able to visit Bill on many occasions, both on my own and with church missions, and to see the evolution of, as you said, Bill, where things were since the Good Friday Agreement and even to now and going forward. It's just been astounding.
Mm-hmm. The history of Ireland is fascinating in so many respects. It's a country that's produced, so much of the world's great literature, drama, poetry, but against the background of terrible suffering. And for me, I've always been interested in Ireland because it represents a tremendous triumph over adversity. The people keep suffering all kinds of troubles that most of us can't imagine, but continue to create and to play such significant roles in the history of the whole world, including the United States. So it's a story of bringing continuing good out of profound difficulty.
And for me, one of my interests personally has been Celtic spirituality and Celtic Christianity. And that's built around forgiveness, reconciliation, and a holistic view of the world and the people in it. And to see how that integrates into the reality of life in Ireland, and more specifically Northern Ireland, has been fascinating for me.
Even though we don't always practice what we preach.
True.
But we've witnessed how many people do practice it.
Yeah.
And what makes a church in downtown Chicago interested in sending people?
I would say that our church has demonstrated tremendous commitment to ministering in every sense of the word. It's not enough to preach and hear the message of the gospel. Our church is very committed to outreach in not only the local community in terms of working to serve the people of Chicago, but recognizing that we are a whole worldwide community of Christians. And so we have many trips, not only to Ireland, but for example, to Central America, Mexico, other regions that often have been plagued by hardship and difficulty. We call them mission and reverse trips because we're going not so much to teach or to preach, but to learn and then bring the ideas and the experience and the relationships that we form home with us so that we can use them in our own ministries.
Right.
Great.
And with, as Elizabeth said, we have trips that go all over the world, and we also have trips that are right here in the Chicagoland area. And for me, mission is twofold. You take what you've learned over wherever you've gone, but you have to be able to effectively translate it and evolve it into the reality of where you are now. And with Northern Ireland, just with my own background and my own gifts, I feel like I'm able to do that personally. And Fourth Presbyterian and Old St. Patrick's Church are fantastic congregations to be able to help facilitate that. Because as Elizabeth said, For church, it's in our mission statement, we're a light in the city. And, you know, it's where the rubber meets the road, where you actually actively engage in the gospel of Jesus Christ to feed the hungry, cure the sick, and, you know, provide a means for forgiveness and reconciliation here in the community.
The relationship that my organization has with Forth was such a good fit. I mean, I sensed that from my very first visit to Chicago in May of 1999.
So that too has been an ongoing relationship.
Absolutely, and I like to think the one that has been mutually beneficial.
Elizabeth and Mark, do you have favorite stories, things that struck you while you were gone?
Several.
Yes.
I'm sure.
Several. Oh, you want to go first?
Okay. Well, for me, what stood out the most was meeting a group of 5 men who were all participants in the WAVE organization that Bill mentioned. They were all victims of the violence. The man who really led the discussion was named Alex. He had been a cab driver, and one day in October of 1991, his cab was bombed. He was thrown right out onto the street. He lost one leg as a result. So he has the permanent physical injury as well as the terrible emotional scars. But, you know, as Bill was saying, the effort toward reconciliation, I would say, does begin with the individual, but we saw what happens when the individuals draw together in a group, when they know that they're not alone and they have support and the kind of comfort that they can draw from one another. And what impressed me most was that all these men were determined not to let their lives be dictated to by hatred or rage or vindictiveness. I mean, probably nobody would have blamed them if they had spent the rest of their lives just consumed with hatred. But they were not going to let their attackers have the last word on their lives. They were determined to move past that, live the best lives they could, and work for the benefit of one another as well as themselves.
It's a great example of a response. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I've been on, as I said, many of these trips already, and the first time I met Bill, he took us on a tour around the trust, and there is a tree planted in the garden there. And it was dedicated to people who had been affected by suicide and self-harm. And Bill explained that since the Good Friday Agreement, there's been a surge in suicide and self-harm among young people because they had, during the conflict and during the troubles, they were able to identify with one side or the other. It gave them an identity. It gave them a purpose.
A goal in life, yeah.
And for me, having been in the military myself, to try and get my arms around the fact that someone would take their life because they didn't have a sanction to hate and no longer had an identity that was built around conflict, that really affected me down to my core. It really, really did. And when we, Elizabeth, this last trip, these gentlemen that were injured severely, these were innocent people. They were non-combatants. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were Catholic and they were Protestant. And, you know, what I thought of when I listened to Elizabeth is the power of one. It starts out with an individual, but one becomes 2, becomes 4.
Exactly.
And we know of one who influenced 12, and, well, they've done pretty well since then.
Thank you to Bill and Mark and Elizabeth for your time today. I'm Polly Toner for Different Drummers and the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries. Keep the faith.